Happy Friday, everyone. We made it. Thank you so much for joining us. Our webinar will begin shortly. And while we wait, please don't be shy. Enter into the chat where you're joining us from. We always love to see where everyone is tuning in from across the globe. And Amina, thank you so much for joining us and letting us know you're here. Kicked us off. So thank you. If you have any questions for our speakers today, we encourage you to ask those questions. We just kindly remind you to use the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen to submit the questions for our speakers. And once we finish up today's presentation, we will get to those questions. Again, welcome. Good day. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This event is called HRCI Insights, and these are episodes that provide insights on current HR services, developments, and technologies. Thank you for joining us today. I have a couple housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. This is an interactive session. Please use the chat to talk amongst yourselves and tell us where you're tuning in from. The chat is also a great way for you to expand your professional network and to learn from each other. We just kindly ask that you limit your LinkedIn profile shares to 2 times so we can carry on the conversation. And also, please make sure you keep all comments professional and respectful. Any bad actors will be ejected. If you have any questions for today's speakers, please remember to use that Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Also, we want HRCI Insights to be accessible to everyone, so we have closed captioning running. If you do not need this resource, please click on Show Captions across the bottom of your screen, and then choose caption options to hide subtitles. If you are new to HRCI, we welcome you. If you're a returning attendee, we are so happy to see you again. We are honored that all of you have joined us today. We always encourage you to bring a friend next time, whether they are certified or not. My name is Megan Hayes. I'm the Director of Corporate Sponsorships here at HRCI. Today's topic is why managers are struggling, fixing the feedback tools that no longer work. It is my very big pleasure to recognize and introduce our speakers. Returning to us from Bonusly is David Brown and Deborah Squires, and also joining them is Tayana Owings. And from here, I will let David take over and he will introduce our speakers. Welcome to you all. We're so glad to see you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. Hello, everyone. We are very excited to be with you all again. I think it's been a few months since the Bonusly crew has been back, but we are back and we're here on a Friday, so we're excited. I hope everyone is in a great mood. The weekend is on the horizon, just a few more hours for us East Coasters. But before we get to our introductions, I want to give a shout out. I see LaShonda in the chat is from Killeen. Fun fact, that is where my family is from, and my family is actually doing a huge family reunion there this summer, so I wonder if I'll see you there, LaShonda. But it is so good to see you all. My name is David. I am calling in from Jacksonville, Florida. It is not too hot yet, but at least warm enough for the beach, so I will be there this weekend. But hope you all are having a great first week of June. The summer is starting to be here. We have graduations, we have vacations coming up. And so really hope you all are taking some time this summer to enjoy the sun, the outdoors, some fun with some friends and family. But with that, we will introduce our speakers. I am really looking forward to today's conversation. And so with the topic, being around feedback and managers, I'm going to ask Deborah and Tiana to go ahead and introduce themselves, let us know where they're calling from, a little bit about their company, and then to go ahead and set the stage, I want you all to share what is one piece of feedback that has changed how you work or lead. And we'll start with you, Deborah.
Thanks, David. And I followed Megan's advice for this webinar and brought my friend Tiana, so she's going to get to go next. But I am Deborah Squires. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Bonusly. I am dialing in or calling in from Fort Worth, Texas, and I saw a lot of Texans out there represented in this really remarkable, very large audience that we have on this call today. So super excited to connect with you all. I am with Bonusly, and Bonusly is the recognition platform that cultivates and facilitates strong relationships between companies and their employees, employees and their peers, and managers and their teams, tying recognition to thriving cultures and high performance. So super excited to be here today as it relates to the some of the best leadership advice that or feedback that I have gotten early in my leadership career. I was struggling to have all the answers and felt like took a lot of responsibility of having all the answers for my team and trying to get it all done myself. And the advice that I got was really remarkable. It was two parts. One, as you grow in responsibility, it's less about having all the answers and more about asking the right questions so that you get to the right outcomes. And two, on those really complex problems, generally the answers don't come from within your head anyway. The answer is in the room with the people who are closest to the problem. And your job as a leader is to ask the questions of them to get to the right outcome and solutions. So that advice came to me way back in, I'm almost sad to say this, in the mid 90s when I first became a leader. So maybe I got this advice before many of you were in the workforce or maybe even born. So I share that with you because it was pivotal in my relationship with my role as a leader. And so I'll pass it over to Tiana to introduce herself and Cloverleaf.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invite, Deborah and David. We are big Bonusly fans at Cloverleaf and feel very kindred spirits. So always enjoy hanging out with you all and, 1,500 of my best HR friends. So thank you all for the honor of being able to join you all today. My name is Tiana. I got my start in the HR world more on the L&D side. I started out in retail operations, and that's when I discovered like L&D is a thing. I like this. I like helping people learn things, and sort of fell backwards into HR leadership. I don't know how many of you have the story of starting as a generalist and then specializing. I started as a specialist and then went generalist. But like one of the things I love doing is building programs. I've built learning and development programs or HR programs in several different companies over the last 10 or 15 years. And I work for Cloverleaf. I am the director of people there. And Cloverleaf is a people development platform that delivers automated, personalized coaching in the flow of work through Slack, Teams, email. We have 12 different assessments on our platform right now, and we turn the results from those assessments into personalized coaching tips so that coaching can be for everybody in the organization, not just, the executive or C-suite level. So what that means for us is we don't have to wait for your next one-on-one or for the next workshop on feedback or the next performance review in order to be able to get insights into one another, insights into yourself. We help grow self and others awareness and EQ through our platform. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was early in my career, some of you might relate to this, as a new frontline manager, I was really driven by doing things by the book. I wanted things to be right. I wanted to make my mark. I was like, this is what we're supposed to do. We're going to do it that way. Maybe a little bit of a savior complex. Looking back, that might have been the case. I took pride in knowing the policies and the procedures and how to do things right. So I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and one of my first bosses who knew this about me told me when I took my first manager position, like, don't change anything for 30 days. Just go in there, listen, learn, build relationships. Like, you'll figure out the things, look for quick wins. If there's something that's a fire, like, let's talk about it. But otherwise, just go in there and build relationships. Like, he knew that team would not do well if I just kind of came in and started changing everything and trying to make my mark. So I did. And wildly, like, that was great feedback. Like, focus on relationships first. The rest of it will kind of fall into line after that. And I have learned that like progress over perfection sometimes is the way to go, and relationships first. So that was great feedback. It stuck with me for many, many, many years.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. So if you have been to one of Bonusly's webinars before, you'll know we love to do our webinars sort of panel style, love to interact with the audience, and we always save some time at the end for some Q&A. And so we have several questions for Deborah and Tiana around feedback and managers, and just really looking forward to hearing their thoughts from their experiences, from their expertise and what they're dealing with in the day-to-day. But before we get into that, I do want to set the stage here for just a few minutes. And the next few slides, the stats, the studies, I'm sure for many of you tuning in as people leaders, HR leaders, is not going to be anything new. But I do think it is important just to set the stage, like I said, before we dive into the conversation. And so, why managers are struggling. This is actually going to be a two-part series that we're doing with HRCI, with part 2 coming at the end of June. So be on the lookout. But managers are burned out. Like I said, probably not any new news for those tuning in, and teams are disengaged. But we here at Bonusly especially really believe that it's not about bad people, but it's about broken systems. And so today we're going to explore why managers are failing and really how feedback in a few weeks recognition can turn things around. And so, like I said, the numbers here tell the story. These stats, these studies, I'm sure you see on LinkedIn all the time. I'm sure you've seen them in other webinars, but they tell the story. Engagement is tanking. 31% of employees are engaged, which is the lowest that it's been in a decade. And not only that, but 67% of managers themselves are disengaged. And this is really crucial because 70% of engagement is tied to the effectiveness of your managers. And these numbers aren't because managers don't care. And it's because they're stuck in this system that has set them up to fail. And they're the most important lever that we have in performance, but right now they are really the most unsupported. And a lot of times we tend to blame poor management on individual shortcomings, bad communication, weak leadership, lack of initiative. And while this may be the case in some scenarios, it really is not the full story. And so the real issue here is that managers don't care, isn't that they don't care or aren't trying. It really is the system, like we said. And so it really boils down to these three outdated methods. So outdated tools, which keep them stuck in rituals, and they don't really reflect on how work happens today, especially how fast work has changed in the last few years. And we see that in annual reviews and clunky HR systems that don't really support real-time coaching or recognition. We see that in overloaded roles. We hear it a lot, the player coach role, where managers are stretched extremely thin. They're asked to lead larger and larger teams while also hitting their own deliverables. But not only that, handling their own admin, handling PTO requests when people are out sick, and somehow still finding time to coach and mentor their teams. That is unmanageable by design. And all that's also to underdeveloped skills. We talk about this a lot here at Bonusly. Deborah's done a few blogs on it, even found the term accidental managers, but it really is a result in just the ways that we promote people. A lot of managers weren't trained to lead. They were promoted because they were really good individual contributors. Then they were promoted, and then we left them just to figure it out on their own. And this one hits home for me because here in Jacksonville, I'm not going to say any names, but I have a group of friends who we hang out all the time. And, it was a couple years ago, almost every time we hung out, everyone would just talk and talk about this one manager and just how awful they were, how they just never felt supported, to the point where I want to say two or three people left the company solely because of this manager, and at least two or three others switched different departments or teams because of this manager. And it really is because of this. He was a great IC, was promoted, and then never given the training or the skills that they needed to be a manager. And so, no, it isn't a them problem, it's a system problem. And if we don't really fix this system, we're just going to keep getting the same disappointing results over and over again. And so we boiled it down to, high expectations, low support equals chaos. And that kind of is where we are right now. So what's happening in the world? I'm sure it is no secret the world is semi-chaos right now. We have return to office in some places. We have remote work. We have hybrid work. We have economic pressure to where we wake up almost every day with new developments. We have a generational shift to where there's more generations than ever before working in the workplace. We have more responsibilities with fewer resources. I'm sure many of you, especially in the HR realm and as people leaders, have heard it a lot, do more with less. You have limited budget, you're having a slash budget, but we still need you to hit all these goals. And so that really applies to managers as well. They're facing the perfect storm, and we've really left them to sink or swim. And so we boiled it down into these four pillars of broken management. Like we said earlier, first is annual reviews. They're too late, they're biased, they're too focused on just checking boxes. Managers dread them, employees fear them, they induce anxiety, and really no one walks away better from it. We talk about one-on-ones a lot here at Bonusly. They really should be the most valuable time that a manager spends with their team. But in reality, they are the most canceled, rescheduled, reduced time meeting. And like we were going to talk about later today, they've really been reduced just to status updates, which could be handled async. And then what we're going to talk about in a few weeks is the recognition. We left them with outdated systems that feel ceremonial or impersonal, or again, just checking a box. where today's employees really want recognition that's timely, specific, tied to real impact, but we're not giving the managers the tools to do this. And then lastly, like we mentioned as well, workloads. We're piling more and more on people, more admin work, more pressure without giving them the tools they need to do this. And so these four pillars are crumbling, and it's time that we rebuild this system that actually supports managers in doing the work that matters. Teams are craving this purpose, potential, and passion. And so we talk about purpose. Employees really want to know that the work they're doing matters. They want to see that their role connects to the bigger picture and be recognized for it. We see this in passion. We want to feel seen and supported by especially our managers, but also our peers. And it turns work into something that's worth us showing up for, whether it be in office, whether it be virtually, whether it be remote. And the potential, we want employees that aren't stuck. They want to be continuously coached and guided and developed and given the feedback to do their job. And for managers, it comes to clarity, capacity, and confidence. They want visibility into what their teams are working on, the priorities, the progress. And oftentimes right now, there's no way for managers to keep up with this in a sustainable way to see what their teams are working on. And capacity, time and space to focus on managing, not just doing. And this comes down to the multiple tasks, while also having multiple people that they have to manage. And then confidence. So giving them the tools and especially the training to, like we're going to talk about today and in a few weeks, feedback and recognition. And so those are really the two most powerful tools that a manager has. And like I said, in a few weeks, we'll talk about recognition, but today is all around feedback and guidance. Guidance is about coaching, not correcting. It means giving clear, consistent, actionable feedback before problems snowball. Doing them regularly, not waiting for the once a year performance review to give all this feedback from 365 days. Doing it regularly, connecting it to daily work, to daily growth. And so we're going to dive in here, and I'm really excited to just hear from Tiana and Deborah, but I hope that really just set the stage on really what we believe here at Bonusly, and that managers today are not set up to succeed. And so there are ways and things that we can do to dive into that. And so today, let's get into feedback. And so with that, before we get into the few questions we have for Deborah and Tiana, we're going to launch a poll here. And this poll is going to ask two questions. One being, how confident are you in your ability to give effective feedback? And then part two, how confident are you in the abilities of your leaders in general to give effective feedback? And so this is on 1 to 5, 1 being not confident, 5 being extremely confident. This is anonymous. We're just going to share it here on the screen for everyone to see. But this will really help us set the stage. And so we'll leave that up just for a few minutes while I ask this first question to Tiana, and then we'll look at the results before Tiana answers. So this first question for you both is, what are some of these outdated feedback practices that you still see managers relying on? And what do you think that we should replace them with? And so we'll start with you, Tiana, but let's go ahead and see what the poll results are. All right, looks like for question 1, looks like majority is in that 4, which is awesome. And then I think, like we expected there, that number 2 question is right there in the 3. And so Tiana, I'll let you react to those results and then dive into that first question.
Yes, I kind of assumed we'd sort of be a little bit middle of the road, but this is good to hear. And there's an interesting thing with you all being able to coach your managers, because there's a little bit more confidence from you all than where you feel like their confidence is with your teams. So there's a little bit of a shift there that hopefully we could help bring some things more into alignment. Some outdated feedback practices, I have 2. I think, Deborah, you've got a couple too, but the thought of like what works for me or what I need when it comes to feedback is what everyone needs. Like, it's one size fits all feedback. It really needs to be a lot more personalized to that person and what it is that they need. You've got some people who want you to just be real blunt, and then you need other people who need you to kind of like pad it a little bit. So that's one thing, is kind of taking the one size fits all approach. The second one, I think it was Ken Blanchard who called it the seagull method. It's kind of that swoop and poop. It's like you don't hear from your manager, and then they swoop down and they like poop all over everything and tell you everything that's terrible, and then they leave and you don't see them again. So that's definitely not the most effective. That is certainly not continuous feedback, to only hear from your managers when things have gone so terribly wrong that everything is like literally hitting the fan at that point. So much more moving to the continuous feedback culture would be way better than the swoop and poop. Deborah, what about you?
I love that term. Well, I actually have a reference to poop in my examples as well. So we used to call this the poop sandwich. It's basically the feedback sandwich where you bring out the really nice fluffy bread and provide some fluffy feedback and positive recognition. Then the meat of it is the actual poop, and then another fluffy piece of bread on the backside. So the person leaves that conversation dizzied by like, sounds like I'm doing well. I got more positive feedback than constructive feedback. So not really sure what I'm supposed to do with that. And so we still see that happening a lot. We also see people waiting for an event, like they're waiting for the right time. The right time to provide feedback is in the moment when you recognize the need for it. And the reason that's important is because that's the moment that it will mean the most to the individual who the feedback is intended for. That's the moment that they can actually change the outcome. Waiting for a timed event, whether it's next week or next month or the annual performance review, does not help them improve the outcomes. And the whole point of providing constructive feedback is to actually help them improve. That's hard to do when it's retroactive. So those are really my areas where we still have opportunities, and we continue to see people using outdated methods in lieu of what is considered kind of a modern feedback culture approach.
Absolutely. I know we did a webinar, I believe last year with HRCI on feedback, and we talked about that sandwich method especially, and really how just confusing it is for especially the employee about, oh, great, oh, bad, oh, I guess good. And so I'm really glad you mentioned that. And that is just an example of one of the outdated systems that we're going to keep talking about today. And so with that, we're going to launch one more poll just to get to know the audience a little more. This one's a little multiple choice answer, and so you can select as many that relate to you. But what gets in the way of the leaders in your organization giving timely, in the moment guidance and feedback? And so, as you can see here, there's probably a dozen more that we could have included, but there are multiple reasons that maybe the leaders in your organization don't do this or don't feel confident doing this. So I'd love for you all to answer that question while I ask our panelists the next question for them. And so, Deborah, we're going to start with you on this one. But what do you think most managers, why do you think most managers still struggle to give timely guidance, even when they know that it's important? And then what practical steps can they take to overcome this? And so before you answer, let's go ahead and see these poll results and just see what our audience says. All right, looks like we have number one, they're too busy or overwhelmed, which definitely applies to what we talked about in the beginning. And then we also have they just avoid it or they're uncomfortable, especially constructive. So those are the top three there. And so we'd love your reaction to that and then to dive into that question.
Yeah, I'm really not surprised. And I actually appreciate that an audience of HR practitioners are recognizing that management as a concept and a function is fundamentally broken. We've given managers way too many direct reports, way too many individual contributor responsibilities, and we've really overwhelmed them with outdated processes, outdated tools. And in some environments, there is not a culture of ongoing and continuous feedback. And so there's this mystical thing around, or like concept around providing constructive feedback. The reality is feedback is any communication on a person's performance or behavior. And it can be positive or constructive, but we make the constructive feedback such an obstacle to overcome. We make it an unnatural process to engage in. But by and large, the fact that managers have 10, 12 direct reports, they have individual contributor responsibilities, they have reporting up responsibilities where they have to gather from disparate systems what's going on. We've just diluted their ability to have impact and even recognize in the moment the opportunities to provide that feedback. I would also argue in many cases, they don't see in the moment what they need to see. They don't have good visibility because the insight that they get on someone's performance or behavior is very much a slice of the totality of their overall impact and work product. So without systems that bring to light what people are doing, what they are working on, not from a micromanagement perspective, but from a feedback perspective, people being recognized for the great contributions, stepping in and helping a teammate out, or achieving a key milestone. If you don't have that visibility, it's hard to tie together feedback that is impactful and meaningful to an individual, and it's based only on a small sliver of what you see. Um, there's the cultural impact of, is feedback this massive rock that lands on people, or is it delivered as a continuous process, just bite-sized chunks that are actionable, insights on our own ability to be more effective, or someone else's ability to be more effective, or where they should lean in more. Like when people are doing things well, they also need to know that's the thing to lean into. If that's your strength, capitalize on that. And so we just need to make it easier for managers to have the capacity and have the visibility to recognize those moments and act on them in the moment. I don't know how you feel about that, Tayana. I'd love to hear your input.
Oh, goodness. Yes to all of that and to all of the things on the poll and the pop-up. All of those are things, and I sometimes want to zoom out and kind of look at the human side of this. I think another reason our managers struggle is, well, we probably have as many traumatic experiences of really poorly delivered feedback as we have people on this call. We could probably write a very like epic novel about all of our terrible feedback experiences from people giving us feedback and it was delivered poorly. I mean, we all have a bad feedback story. If you don't, like, I want to talk to you and study you and see how you've avoided that in your professional career. So it really does, like, it stresses us out. Like we take that trauma into any other conversation about feedback. It makes us jumpy about having to give feedback. I mean, we've all probably lost sleep over some sort of feedback conversation that we've had. We've stressed for days. We've written an email and then deleted it and then written an email and then deleted it like 100 times. Had a sweaty panic attack like 5 minutes before the one-on-one starts. Like anybody, is that like only me that's had that? So our brains like to take these traumatic experiences into our future conversations, and then we grow to think that they're all just going to be terrible feedback experiences because that's what we just grow to think that feedback is. So we tend to like stress about it too much, and it builds up into this thing that then can explode into some like emotional volcano of, the swoop and poop perhaps, or something like that, once it actually spills out. So I have found that there's two things that have helped change the game in when I've done leadership development or even in my own personal life. And that first is embracing radical candor, like hat tip to Kim Scott, and that balance of caring personally about somebody, but also being willing to challenge them directly and loving and respecting them enough as a human being to blend both of those. Brene Brown says that clear is kind. So it's one of those, like, how are we being kind to one another? By being honest and candid with one another. And then that second is understanding what that person needs. Literally, the gal on my team told me the other day, she's like, sometimes I want somebody to just tell me what I'm doing that is terrible. Like, I want blunt feedback. I don't want people to be overly nice. Others might actually want that feedback sandwich. That might be what some people actually need based upon their personality type or their motivators and things like that. So we can't assume everyone's needs are the same. Can't assume it's what we need. So the best way to approach feedback is a way to do it in a way that's meaningful for that particular person. And that takes us time to get to know someone. And with as overworked as our managers are, that makes it harder, because how do I get to know what Deborah needs versus what David needs? Like, we need some sort of way to help identify those sorts of things.
Absolutely. I love what you both pointed out. And I will say someone in the chat mentioned it as well, but they said that word feedback oftentimes is a scary word. And that's why here at Bonusly, we've started to swap it out when we can with guidance, because that really is what it boils down to at the heart of it. And one thing that came to mind while you both were talking was that previous webinar we did. I think one of the panelists was talking about feedback, and they were saying, it is such a unique thing and sometimes scary thing for us because it's not something that we typically practice outside of work or in like real life. Like we don't go up to our friends and say, "Hey, can I give you feedback on this?" or vice versa. And so they were saying that, you're not alone. Like this is a semi-scary thing for a lot of people. And it's one of those muscles that we have to and skills that we have to just keep practicing and honing in on. And so thank you both for all that you've offered so far. But we'll start with you, Tiana, with this question. Whether it's one-on-ones or check-ins or meetings, whatever your company may call it, how can managers use this time not just to check tasks, but to check in on growth, engagement, and recognition?
I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about in the poll, and Deborah, what you were talking about. I mean, so many of us are so tactically focused. We have too many things on our plate and too many deadlines that came out of nowhere without maybe a lot of thought. So hat tip to all of you who are project managers who realize that we sometimes make up deadlines that are not realistic, and then we don't ask questions about them. So because we have so many things tactically that we're doing, we really do need to just add things to our one-on-ones, maybe to just remind us to like have conversations about people's growth, to remind us to give recognition. Early in my career, again, I was a perfectionist at heart early in my career, and my approach, which some of you have probably worked with managers like this too, is if they're doing a good job, well, that's what I'm paying them for. So recognition, not as important. Tiana had to learn very early on in her career, let's plug this into my calendar. Literally old school paper planner, every other Friday, recognize 3 people, like catch people in the act of doing something good. I had to work out that muscle of recognizing people for doing good things to reinforce that behavior. And it might sound ridiculous now, but I was so focused on getting things done that I didn't stop to recognize people if I didn't make it something visually reminder to do it. So one of the things I do in my role now is I will change through our talent management system. I will change our company-wide one-on-one talking points so that there's a visual reminder in there to like celebrate something good. I've put in the updates to say like, what's something you're proud of last week? So people have a chance to kind of like pat themselves on the back a little bit. We use Bonusly, which has made it like super easy and fun to recognize other people, and then people get something from it. So there's these little things that may seem little but can have really big impact, because sometimes with our human brains, we just need it to be in front of our face to remember and to make it's as important to have those sorts of human conversations as it is to talk about the status of the project and the numbers and the bar charts and the graphs.
Love that. It's funny because we commonly will use the phrase, you shouldn't have a meeting that could have been an email, but then we turn around and in many one-on-ones have status updates that don't require a conversation because both of you can write and read. So really moving from a place of talking through where we are compared to plan, for example, with a salesperson, where you are compared to quota for the month, you can see that in the inform section of your one-on-one document that you share together. What's more compelling is, wow, I see you're 78% of quota for the month and we're only 40% into the month. What are the keys in driving those early wins, and how can we build on that momentum? That's the conversation to have in a one-on-one, not the review of the actual results that you can easily read and understand. So we need to make sure that we are creating a flexible framework, but with consistent standards around what people cover in one-on-ones, not because they don't know inherently what they need to cover, but because they are busy. Employees are busy, managers are busy. No one that I have ever spoken to in the last few years has said, I have extra capacity to just think and plan in advance of meetings. So we need to provide them a structure that works for them and brings out the best of both the manager and the employee in those conversations. So they're talking about what's important, not just what happened. So that's my feedback.
That reminded me of, we did a webinar on Tuesday of this week, and Deborah was on that panel, and we were talking about who should own the agenda of one-on-ones, how do you develop them, and really just talking about putting the employee in the driver's seat. Let them build the agenda, let them add the talking points that they want to talk about, So that way it turns into they can ask what they need, but then it really focuses in on that growth, that relationship building. And that's one of my favorite times of the week with my manager is just our one-on-one. I mean, the first half is really just us talking about what we did that weekend, what's coming up this weekend, and not anything forced, like whatever we feel comfortable sharing, but just helping me build that relationship with my manager and then allowing me to say, okay, but I have questions on this, or can I ask your advice on this? And if there is anything that he needs to talk about, we can. But to Deborah's point, let it be async if it needs to be, and use that one-on-one time really for relationship and growth and development, and what that employee needs. And so I'm glad you both called that out. And Deborah, we'll stick with you with this next question. How does giving effective feedback change when you're managing remote, cross-functional, hybrid, cross-department teams, whatever it may be in today's world?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is the challenge that many of us had to adapt to very rapidly, i.e. overnight, 5 years ago. I have always, since I've been a leader, managed in remote settings where, my team members were not always sitting in the same office that I was in back when I sat in an office. And some of the keys that drove success, even way back in those days, is creating opportunities for connections. It's more important when you're not physically in the same place with opportunities for casual conversation and relationship building. You have to be intentional about building those relationships and trust before you need to have high stakes conversations. If you're having high stakes conversations or providing constructive feedback and there is not a foundation of trust, that feedback is not going to land the same way. The employee or the team member who you're providing that feedback to is not going to view it with the same level of buy-in and trust that someone that you have a strong relationship with. So you need to take the time to build the relationship before you need the relationship. You need to rely on that trust, in order to have the opportunity to be most impactful in providing that feedback. You can't make every interaction with your teammates focused on an agenda and have a business purpose. You have to find ways that speak to your team members. Every team is different. Every team member is different. You need to be asking those questions when you have a new hire or when you take on a new team. How do they want to engage? How do they want to build relationships? I'm not suggesting that you pry into their personal life if that's not something that's natural for them. But they can also tell you, because most people have a point of view, what is the best way for us to do that? And also, what is the best way to get feedback? Do you want a quick Slack in the moment when it's happening? Do you want to set aside separate time? Do you want me to bring it, share in advance what I want to talk about and bring it to, a face-to-face meeting? Rely on your team member to tell you how to be successful with them. Don't assume you know, and don't assume what works for you works for them. What do you think, Tiana?
Yeah, I wanted I just wish I could high five you through the Zoom call. I'm so glad you mentioned intentionality because I feel like that's a thing that we definitely need when we're more like hybrid remote things. It needs to be timely, it needs to be specific and balanced. This is like old adage that's still really, really great. And that becomes even more critical when you don't have this option of maybe just like running into somebody on the way to the break room, like, oh, Deborah, I've been meaning to talk with you about this. Um, so, but honestly, realistically, we shouldn't be relying on happenstance to get feedback anyway. It shouldn't just be like, oh, I ran into you on the way to the loo, and so now I'm going to give you this feedback. It should be something more intentional than that. So putting a meeting on the calendar, again, like, whether it's a quick Slack call, do I need an agenda beforehand? Again, somebody asked in the chat, like, how do I know what kinds of things my people need? This is one of the things that Cloverleaf helps with. If Deborah's on my team, I can literally go say, what does Deborah need when it comes to giving hard feedback? And it's going to give me tips to kind of make sure I'm delivering that in a way that's good for Deborah. Does she need an agenda beforehand? Does she want to just drop it in the moment? It'll give me that kind of input. But the other thing I will add on there too is that if you don't already have a healthy culture of feedback where people respect one another enough to be honest and have that trust that Deborah was talking about, putting them all in the same building isn't going to magically create a healthy feedback culture, right? Like it's 2025. We've been living on Zoom for 5 years now. Even when we're in an office building, I go in and like all the meeting rooms are full with people on Zoom calls. Like we're all in the same place, but we're all in Zoom calls. So at this point, I think it's less about where that feedback is delivered and more about how we approach the conversation and how we honor that person that we have to give feedback with. And are we going at it with assuming good intent and being very intentional about how we give that feedback to build trust?
I always chuckle because in almost every webinar we do, intentionality comes up all the time. And it is so true. No matter what the topic is, the situation is, we talk about it a lot in terms of Bonusly has, in terms of, how do you replicate like what used to happen in the office to the virtual world? And it's not just copy and paste. Like everything we do has to be intentional, and we're all learning. But I do also love what you said, Deborah, and I think Kim mentioned it too in the chat, but build the relationship before you need the relationship. I think that is, you take anything away from this webinar, take that, and then also Tiana's soup and poop. I love that still, because even talking about the agendas and setting up meetings, I mean, oftentimes it is, come in, you're so confused as to what happens, then you don't see them for another X amount of time. And so thank you both so much for that. We have just one more question for you both. And I do want to just preface, we do have the Q&A. So Tiana and Deborah are ready, excited to answer any and all of your questions. And so over the next few minutes, if you have any questions that have come to mind, anything we didn't cover that you want to hear about, be sure to use that box, because as you can see, the chat moves really quick. We won't see them in there. But this last question is a little bit of a teaser for our next webinar in a few weeks, which will be on almost the similar subject, but we'll start with you, Deborah, and or I'm sorry, we'll start with you, Tiana. And this one is around recognition. And so we often treat recognition and feedback separately, two different things happening at two different times. But how do you see them working together? And really, how does recognition help feedback actually stick with the employees?
So, like I said earlier, my background is learning development, so I get really nerdy into the neuroscience of how we learn to change behaviors and what we need as adult learners. We need lots and lots of repetition, and we need things to tie back to an experience. So that specific part of feedback is really core to connecting that feedback to what it was that we did. So we want to redo more of those things. So if I just tell Deborah, like, oh my gosh, you're so great, I don't know how we'd live without you, she might feel temporarily elated and like, oh, okay, I'm awesome. But that doesn't really like tell her what it was that she did or how it was that she did that, whatever that thing is. So I'm not really reinforcing something. Like I want her to repeat that behavior. I've got to be a little bit more specific with that. And I also think it's important to tie recognition not just to what somebody did, but also how they did it. So like the technical thing of like, yes, you beat your quota. That's awesome. Let's celebrate the heck out of that. But also how you did that. So we should be celebrating the heck out of people who maybe approached a problem with a lot of curiosity and creativity, even if the solution ended up not being the one we took. Like, let's celebrate how they approached that problem. And, acknowledging the salesperson who maybe didn't meet quota, but they were super ethical in everything that they did. They were building great relationships, and not just celebrating the person who exceeded quota, but maybe stepped on some people to get there, right? So it's not just the results to focus on, it's also how they got those results, and celebrating the human behind that, that we actually want to be able to reinforce, because those behaviors can then apply to other pieces of their role besides just that one particular result that you're celebrating.
I really love that you called out specifically the how people are showing up is as important as the what that they're impacting, because that really gets to the core of the shared beliefs and values and the culture. And it's critical to call that out. It's not just the outcomes. Yes, outcomes are important, but how you got there or how you attempted to get there and what it meant for you individually to do that is just as critical and helps people truly feel seen for the totality of their contributions, not just the output or outcomes. I think I said this before. Recognition is a form of feedback, and it's essentially catching and celebrating people at their best when they do the work that matters or that does end up in the results desired. So recognition is an important element of a feedback culture because it emphasizes what you need that person to continue or do more of. But also, when you do it visibly or publicly, it actually sets the tone for everyone else. And it becomes a way of normalizing providing feedback in a very timely, specific, and structured way that is actionable and meaningful. And that practice creates not only trust in individuals, but it also creates an expectation that when there is something worth pointing out, whether it's something great that you did or something great that you accomplished, or an area where you could have been more effective and reached the outcome in a more effective way, people expect you to share that timely and specifically and in a way that's actionable for them. That's really the key in getting to a place where this is just the way that you work and not some separate process that we engage in.
Can I add on really quickly to what you were saying, Deborah? When we first decided we were going to partner with Bonusly a few years ago, I created like a little all team learning thing to just focus on recognition. And organizationally, we were let's just start focusing with recognition. Hopefully this is a great, like, those of you should come back in a month or a few weeks and do the recognition webinar, because that's a safer way for people to start just getting used to reflecting back the actions that were taken or the results that we're doing it. So for a quarter, we're like, let's just catch people in the act of doing good stuff and recognize them. And we've got this new tool to do it. And then once we're starting to build a little bit more trust, then we could start layering on what reinforcing feedback looks like and why it's so honoring to do that, using some of that trust and goodwill that we built from just focusing on what people are doing good for a quarter.
Yeah. And it builds the muscle.
Yes.
People get comfortable using that muscle over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think from even like the IC level, when I'm recognized, to me, it gives me a signal like that person saw whatever I did. This is a great opportunity for me to ask them for feedback on it instead of me awkwardly maybe asking them and they have no idea I maybe did something. And so by getting that recognition, it also is almost like a nice cycle to where I can then in turn ask for feedback on it. And I saw Megan's face. That means we're at time, but perfect timing because we are now ready for our Q&A portion. So get those questions in. But I wouldn't be doing my job on the marketing team here at Bonusly if we didn't launch this poll. And so I will say one thing that I am very sensitive about on webinars is not making them sales pitches. One of the worst things is when you hop on a webinar for an hour and it is an hour-long sales pitch. And so I hope we did you all service and weren't a sales pitch. But if you want to learn more about Bonusly and how we view recognition done right and feedback, go ahead and answer that poll. We will have someone reach out to you. We'd love to chat. We could chat for hours and hours and hours on these topics. And so please feel free to do that. I also am going to drop in the chat Deborah, Tiana, and myself's LinkedIn's. If there's anything you want to talk more about, if there's anything you want to dig deeper on, any questions you want to ask them, I know they would love to connect with you. I know they would love to just keep in touch, keep the relationship going. And so please connect with them. If you have any questions about Cloverleaf, I know Tiana would love to tell you all. Like Deborah mentioned, we use Cloverleaf here at Bonusly, and we just love the daily coaching tips and just all that it provides us. And so answer that poll. Connect with us on LinkedIn. And now I will pass it to Megan for the fun part.
Thank you all so much for this great webinar. Loved it so much. We do ask that you all, if you have questions for our speakers, please don't use the chat because you can see it move really quickly. And so if you have a question for our speakers, please use that Q&A section. And then we will share that recertification activity ID after the Q&A. So let's go ahead and jump in. Deborah and Tiana, this first question is a little long, so bear with me, okay? It's well worth it. How can we enhance the effectiveness of performance reviews by ensuring managers have adequate support adequate supporting documentation of performance while also easing the process to make it less daunting? I will start with that question first because there's multiple within this one.
Awesome. I can hop in, and then maybe Tiana or David can add on. One, you need to bring visibility to the full body of work that people are doing. That includes not only the metrics or performance metrics that they're meeting, but also like how they're going about the work. A very straightforward way to do that is, well, Bonusly does that, first of all. But if you don't have Bonusly, create a recognition channel, make recognition a form of feedback that is offered frequently. As a manager, you need to be able to capture everything that's going on over the course of time and talk about it, not try to gather it all together at the end of the year or the end of the semi-annual cycle, and attempt to do justice to providing feedback in the moment. If you're capturing recognition and feedback or advice coming to individuals, how they're progressing against their goals, how they're growing in their role along the way in a weekly check-in, a very powerful one-on-one structure, and you're capturing the notes from that, then your performance review should merely be another check-in. There should be no surprises. There should be no anxiety. It should be easy for managers. It should be easy and empowering for employees. And the conversation should not be focused on reliving the past because it's already been talked about. It should be looking at the totality of the body of work and how that progresses into future growth for that individual, future impact on the business. You can really flip the script in the approach by doing the work in the moment and creating visibility and transparency into what's going on, and not making managers solely responsible for trying to figure that out once a year or twice a year.
The other thing I would add to that is we as HR people sometimes have created processes that are really arduous and not user-friendly. So if we can take more of like a human design approach to some of these things, our performance reviews don't need to be 15, 20 questions long. They don't need to take an hour per person to fill out. I think some of these things are like in the walls and we feel like this is still what we need to do. So from if we put on our organizational effectiveness hats as HR professionals and start looking at, I mean, we talked earlier about the processes and systems, and we're not setting managers up for success. And sometimes we're at fault for that. So what can we do as HR leaders to reevaluate our processes and systems and figure out how to simplify them? Go get Lisa Bodell's book, Why Simple Wins. She will challenge your thinking so much on how overly complicated we've made a lot of things that are just not necessary. And you will probably earn a lot of points from your managers if you can make all of your performance reviews just a lot easier to do because you looked at the whole system and the process and the platform around it, not just keeping things because that's the way we've always done it.
Very good. And I will say, no need to ask the second parts of those questions because you both answered them very well. So I'll move on to the next question is, how do we get employees comfortable with being in the driver's seat? Love this question.
Diana, do you want to? Yeah.
Yes, I can start on that. I'm going to sound like a broken record because Cloverleaf was such like a cheat sheet for me. When I first started, I was like, I'm going to just use this. There are some that are just going to feel so uncomfortable with it. I'm thinking about one of my coworkers who she's working right now. Her IDP is just like building her own confidence. She's brilliant, but she doesn't necessarily like lean into that yet. And so that's something that she's trying to work on. But you can read this from just based upon, she's an Enneagram 9. If you're familiar with Enneagram, she's a peacemaker. She doesn't want to like rock the boat. And so some of that is helping guide them along if they are that person. Like, how do you just give them a little thing to empower them? And they're like, oh, I actually can do that. Some of it is building the confidence in them for them to be able to advocate for themselves. And some people you don't need to hold their hand like that. Like your Enneagram 8s are just going to rock everything anyway, because that's just their personality. So it's kind of going again back to like, how do you get to know what each of your individual people need and coach and guide them accordingly?
And I would just add to that, ask them and really make it a company-wide or a team-wide approach, not conveyed individually to, between a manager and their team member, put them in a position of contributing to how that works so that they can design the solution that they are expected to engage in.
Very good. We get this question quite a bit. How can you provide best practices of building relationships and providing feedback to a remote team?
Yeah, definitely.
Want to kick us off?
I can take that. Yeah. So best practices in engaging a remote team. There were a few. I could probably go on. There were probably a lot, but there are a few that I center on. One, I think you have to recognize that you have a remote team, and you need to create meeting structures around that. You need to have breaks between meetings, not put people in back-to-back Zoom meetings. You need to have opportunities to engage on a personal level that are not agenda driven and business outcome focused, so that people can build the relationship. And you need to ask your employees what's meaningful for them. Really importantly, if you have a hybrid culture or some people who are in office and some who are remote, you need to have standards for how meetings get started so that the meeting doesn't begin in the meeting room. And then a few minutes later, when the meeting room comes online, the people who are remote have been left out of the initial conversation. So those are a few ways. Any other thoughts, Tayana?
I feel like I need, those old Staples easy buttons. I feel like I need one that says like intentionality or something on it, because I feel like that's the thing that keeps coming back to is, again, yeah, you're not going to just run into somebody and be able to say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Can we talk about this? It's how do you create those intentional space? So we have like a weekly all team meeting with like a rotating topical thing. We'll do trivia once a quarter, just like a fun way to build relationships. We've done like cocktail or cooking classes or like a painting class over Zoom. It's just how do you do those fun things that if you are all in the same city, in the same building, you might be able to go do together after work, but somehow, and there's a bajillion ways of doing that now. But it's, again, you have to like, it's not going to just, you're not going to trip into, a trivia hour. You've got to have some intention around how to use those sorts of things to build relationships.
So true. David, didn't your team do a really cool event together recently?
Yes, so we've done several here at Bonusly, but most recently we did for the Florida hub. We did for anybody from Florida, maybe outside of Florida too, but we all got public subs and then got on Zoom together and did like a grow your own garden activity where we have planted a bunch of herbs, but the public sub piece was just classic Florida.
Definitely. They are really good subs though. I would love to we're running out of time, but I want to get in one more question if I could. I have to provide hard feedback to a manager who is very new to my team, so I do not have a good idea of how they will respond to the feedback. How should I approach this?
Deborah, you're unmuted. Did you want to go first? You want
No,
me to?
you go ahead. I stay unmuted at this point because it's so hard for me to keep track of it.
I have asked this question in interviews before. If this person is new on your team and you didn't get a chance to interview with them, kind of do an interview. I will say, like, what's the, how has a manager given you feedback before when it was successful? What's a manager done in your past when they've given you feedback and it didn't sit well? Like, if you didn't have the chance to interview them, it's part of your get to know you. If you don't have a tool like Cloverleaf or you don't know their DISC results or there's things like that can kind of help guide you. And that, just ask the questions, building the relationships. Like, what has a manager done for your own development before in the past that has been super meaningful? And then what their needs are because you just asked the question. Deborah, what would you add?
Yeah, I think that is an excellent way to start. If you're forced into a situation where you don't have the chance to ask those questions, I would open the conversation by just acknowledging that you wish that you had more of a relationship and understanding of what's important to them and receiving feedback, and then sharing that you want to have this conversation with them, but you also want to use it as a learning for yourself as a leader, so that you together can find the right rhythm and ways of communicating that honor both of you in those feedback situations.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for this great webinar today, and thank you for joining us on this Friday. I hate to say we are out of time, so I want to make sure that we share that recertification activity ID, which is 708-368, again, 708-368, and this has been approved for 1 HR credit towards your recertification. David and Deborah, so great to have you and the Bonusly team back with us. I feel like we've been reunited. And Tayana, thank you so much for joining us and representing Cloverleaf so well. We hope that you all will join us again sometime soon and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again for this great webinar.
Thanks, Meg.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.